are you two? Good? All right, we're ready. We're ready to go, folks. The filming has begun. There's the bells. Hi, honey. Your husband's up here. Okay. Who are these two sweet people? John and Sue, okay. Very nice to meet you. Thank you. I'm glad you're all here. Oh, excuse me. I'm glad you're all here. Jeff tells me that our first week, and to all the dear folks who are watching, thank you. Jeff tells me the first week we have 90-some who have seen it, and last week, high 70s, so that's wonderful. And thank you, everyone. I'd like to begin with an opening prayer from this wonderful new book, The Art of Advent. And it's a painting a day from Advent to Epiphany. And the author does a beautiful job. Her name is Jane Williams. Let us pray. Lord, you have known us from our mother's womb. As we seek you in the face of Jesus Christ, give us your Holy Spirit to lead us daily, more deeply, into the freedom and joy that only you can give. Amen. I have to publicly thank Bob Pizzatello, who helped me as my printer died yesterday. And I am computer illiterate. Oh, here comes our pal, Mike Wolford. Yay, I'll give him a chance to get seated. No, better late than never, Michael. Oh, is it? Again, I want to thank all of you and those online who listened or were here in person for the first 2 weeks. I often say that my new pulpit, I haven't said it yet to Salvatore, but my new pulpit is my computer and adult education. So there's more than one way to move ahead. For the last 2 weeks, we have spent time on the concept, 2 weeks ago, rather, we spent time on the concept of the text without context as pretext. And last time, we looked at the context of the 4 Gospels. In other words, as a good journalist would say, the who, what, where, when, and why of each one. And as a sister of mercy once told me, like a good pastor, the gospel writers selected from the oral and written stories that were available and used them for their gospel to meet the needs of the community. So, is there anything anyone would like to ask or say about any of the previous lectures? Any questions you might have? All right. Well, this morning, I'd like to focus on 2 realities that the season of Advent invokes. The first is a positive power, the positive reality of the incarnation, which we celebrate in a week, Christmas. The second is the negative power of anti-Semitism, which we have faced for generations and continue to experience. And in many ways, the death of Jesus lies at its roots. So let's start with the incarnation. God taking on human nature and form. And I want to read to you the opening of St. John's Gospel that I believe in many ways clearly points to the incarnation. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming. He, Jesus, was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him and believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. One translation says to us that he built his tent to dwell among us, but his own did not receive him. He pitched his tent among us. Well, in the early church history, the incarnation was disputed by some folks. And they were bright. Hi, honey. They were bright and they were sincere and they had a lot of faith. But they just couldn't accept this idea of the God, Jesus, having a human and divine nature. The question about the divinity of Jesus was raised by the heretic Arius. You've maybe heard the word Arianism. And I want to share with you a book that is wonderful. It's called Heretics for Armchair Theologians. And it's illustrated. And it's written by a couple, Usto Gonzalez and Catherine Gonzalez. And it's been illustrated. So you see pictures in here of nobody's perfect, but you need to try. Every one of the heretics, their ideas were illustrated. So I want to read what they had to say toward the end of their book, which I think is a lesson for all of us. Finally, these two folks say, we must remember that most of the heretics discussed in this book were not bad people. They were not trying to invent new doctrine simply to cause a disturbance. They were people whose love of God and of Christian faith led them to inquire into a number of issues and propose answers and solutions that the church found inadequate. They were not entirely wrong. Indeed, most of them affirmed an important truth that Christians should not forget. Thus, Marcion, a heretic, reminded the church that something radically new had taken place. The Mendonites correctly insisted on the truth and full humanity of Jesus. Others on his true and full divinity. In every case, they were partially right. More exactly, the most common problem with the ancient heretics was not that they were wrong, but they were, so to speak, too right. They stressed an important truth so far that it led them to deny other important truths. It's a positive look. It's a great little book to look at. And so the question, was Jesus fully divine and fully human, is what I want to just talk a little bit about. And as the church began to grow, the questions about the divinity of Jesus began to take on more importance, especially with one very intelligent religious leader named Arius. But as time went on, the humanity and the divinity of Jesus were gradually accepted. Not totally. It wasn't until the Council of Nicaea in the 300s, and then later in another council in the 400s, that it was confirmed as a doctrine of the church. 2 natures, 1 person. I often think about the beautiful line in the book of Genesis about creation, that what God made us, male and female, God made us in God's image. In other words, in the incarnation, Jesus appears in our image. I mean, it's something to think about, isn't it? Debates existed over, well, when did he know he was divine? Right away, some said as a child, he knew right away. Popped out of the womb and he knew. And there were all kinds of stories that were circulating about how as a little child he cured birds that fell from the tree. And so one group said he knew right away. Another group thought he didn't know he was divine until the resurrection. But it's interesting that Luke's gospel tells us he was lost in the temple and he went home with his parents and grew in age and wisdom. So this question of Jesus taking on our human nature, what does that say to us? What does that idea that he is divine, yes, but totally human, yes? Does it say anything to you? He understands what we're going through. That's important because some of our fellow human beings don't. Is there anything else that this idea that Jesus was both divine and human? It shows a humility about him. Thank you. Bob? It shows a value and a holiness of the human state. Anybody else? The incarnation, in other words, taking on human flesh. Okay. It's an important doctrine that we sometimes fail to recognize and accept. It calls us to have a profound respect for others. Because if God took on our human nature, it wasn't just Jan's human nature or Bob Pitten's human nature. It was Goldbach's too. And you see the ramifications of that. How we are called to respect one another because we're all made in God's image. And God was so generous that God decided to take on our human form. It's a powerful doctrine. Okay. Thomas Merton, the great Thomas Merton, this is a reader of some of his book of readings, and in an essay he wrote, the essay about conjectures of a guilty bystander. I hate glasses. He writes this. Let me just get the He is a monk of this time. And in Louisville, Kentucky, He leaves the monastery and must go out for something, I don't know what. And he writes this: in Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut Street, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I was theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness, of self-isolation, the world of renunciation and supposed holiness. He goes on to say, then it was as if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts. I have the immense joy of being a human, a member of the race in which God himself became incarnate. If only we all could see ourselves as we really are, if only we could see each other that way all the time, there would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. I suppose the big problem would be we would fall down and worship each other, but this cannot be seen, only believed and understood by a particular gift. I was looking at the morning New York Times, and I saw that Russia was increasing its bombardment of Ukraine so that power is lost. If we only realized that the people we were trying to hurt and kill were not only made in God's image, but God took on the image of a Ukrainian suffering. The doctrine is so profound that it should change the way in which we deal with one another. Not that we have to agree, but that we respect one another. Any comment about that? Yes, sir.
Was Jesus able to be uncertain the way we humans are uncertain?
I think that was Jesus able to be uncertain the way we are is uncertain? That's a beautiful question. My first response was probably because he grew in age and wisdom. He learned his trade from his father. I'm sure from time to time he was uncertain about could he trust these apostles. And I think maybe at his trial, he was maybe a little uncertain about Pilate, because he had a sense Pilate saw something that others didn't see. So I thank you for that question. I think it's a good one. It helps us realize what he was going through. And every time we say the creed, the Nicene Creed, that is when the church said, let's stop the controversy. He's fully human and fully divine, a mystery to be sure. And our task, it seems to me, is to make whatever efforts we can to emulate the way he lived. It's a powerful doctrine, and if we applied it, gun violence, racism, hatred, I think would diminish, because we would realize the person against whom our behavior is poor is made in God, is God taking on our image. Any other comment? Dan, you had one? It's a lot to think about. It's a lot to think about. But it is, yes, sir, did you have your hand up? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
It makes me think about people I met in my life. There's certain people who, when we look at you and you're in their presence, they just seem to look at you as you. It's hard to describe.
I get it, yeah. 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 They, that's a beautiful thought, that when he was saying that when some people look at him, it's like they're looking at him, his inner self, and not the particulars about him. If people really believe that, the term the Karens in this world who approach black people in their neighborhood would take a very different approach. And I have a sense that many of our African American brothers and sisters have not had that feeling of acceptance, that they too are made in God's image. In that sense, the incarnation is powerful, but Phil Knight is made in God's image. And that's powerful too. So that is the celebration we are going to have on Christmas Day. So when we look at the babe, God built his tent and dwelt among us, but we did not accept him, or many did not. Okay, so that's Christmas in many ways. Any other comment, question? It's a big one, isn't it? It's a big one, it's foundational. And that's what Christmas, and that's what Advent is preparing us to look at. All right, the second thing I want to talk about with you is the question, and I think these are all related, of anti-Semitism. The definition of anti-Semitism is a hostile or discriminatory view of the Jews. Where did the name come from? It came from the eldest son of Noah, who was named Shem. The key question in many ways was how to hold the Jews responsible for the crucifixion. Or did they commit deicide, killing God? And there was a firm belief after the resurrection that the divine election that went to the chosen people was now transferred to us as Christians. Now think about that. The divine election was taken from them and transferred to us. So I want to ask this question. In other words, we are much more special than they were or are. Why in this day and age is anti-Semitism a concern? Or do you think it isn't? Jan said it's huge. Could you say a little more about that? It bothers her every day. Anti-Semitism is huge. Can you think of any examples of how it makes an appearance in our society? Vandalism at the synagogues, or murders at a synagogue. Think about that. Going into worship and someone comes in and just shoots because of who you are. That's one huge example. Reasons? Right. Yep. So Jim was saying that a lot of the anti-Semitism arises when folks don't have Jesus in mind. And so they come to conclusions about people, or wrong conclusions. What is one of the things that's being denied by some today? The Holocaust. Now think about it. If you're my age, I was in grammar school in World War II. Two. All right. The plastic surgery works, doesn't it? In World War II, and I remember our family got Life magazine. And toward the end of World War II, when Eisenhower and the others went in to the camps, those photographs came into our home. I don't know if you remember that. But the Holocaust is being denied by some people. That is such a blatant form of anti-Semitism. Some very wealthy Jewish men, Mr. Soros, is being vilified because he gives money to one political party. But it's because he's Jewish. And I think it is everywhere. Admirers of Hitler. We have had some candidates who have expressed that. Discouragement over the relationship between Palestine and Israel. And in our nation, anti-Semitism is walking side by side with white supremacy. And I think that is so important for us to remember. Any other thoughts about that before I tell you a little bit about the history of it? There are really two roots for anti-Semitism, I think, among many, but two important ones: the death of Jesus and who was responsible. And then during the Middle Ages, when the church would not allow people to charge interest, our Jewish brothers and sisters went into the banking and finance business. And I think those two issues are very often foundational in anti-Semitic feelings. There's a wonderful book called Jacob's Younger Brother. And I want to read you just a few things about the history of anti-Semitism and then get your opinion. Here we go. This talks about the Catholic Church's view of the Jews prior to Vatican II. I want to get to St. Augustine. St. Augustine concluded the Jews survive because their existence is beneficial to the church, not because they are good, but they exist because they're beneficial to the Christian church. He said their blind adherence to the Old Testament and their refusal to understand its true significance are evidence that the Old Testament, which every reasonable person can see the coming of Christ, was not faked by the Christians. In other words, when the prophets made statements that looked like a prophecy of Jesus, Augustine said they were. Well, that may not have been what Isaiah was thinking. Augustine also thought that the miserable status of the Jews represented the just wages of those who rejected Christ, and it indicated that the divine prophecies of success were intended for them, but not the Christians. But Augustine wasn't too harsh, and the Jews were able to live in relative peace. But a number of popes around Europe, determined that the Jews had to retain their inferior status and that they should be humiliated in various ways. It wasn't until about the 12th century that scholars began to display a deep interest in the Jewish tradition. There was an order in the 13th century for the Jews to wear an identifying patch, an order by the church. Expulsion of the Jews from England, France, and parts of Germany during the 12th and 13th centuries were justified in terms of the need to protect Christians. There was a desire the Jews could be saved if they could be converted. But then there was a question about about whether that was an authentic conversion. The 16th century popes imposed severe restrictions on the Jews. It's there throughout history, and of course the Crusades are another example. So let's talk about this a little bit. What can we do about it? We all have Jewish friends, or many of us do. It's important to hear them, to listen to them. There is a Jewish writer that I have talked about quite often, Amy Jill Levine, who teaches New Testament. And I did a book review for a group of folks, among them many Jews. And it was just interesting to hear their views and what that must be like for them, even to this day, that they are hated because of who they are. Pope Pius XII, in 1943, after World War II, he took a stand that perhaps helped decrease some anti-Semitism by encouraging all biblical scholars to read the text in their original language. Up to that time, none of us could read the Bible. And then the importance of World War II. And history tells us that some Catholics in the 30s and 40s felt that the treatment of Jews was legitimate. Some felt the only way that Jews could be saved was to convert. So the question of anti-Semitism, and one other thing, some collaborators during the war, and some worked to save the Jews, and some collaborated with the Nazis. But it was at Vatican II that John the 23rd, who called the council, believed that our church should be open to the world. And a full document on the Jews was released with statements like, the Jews are loved by God. Actions by the next popes made some progress, but I'd like to read a summary on page 37 of this book about the Jews. Vatican II reopened all major questions about Jews and Judaism for theological discussion. Now think, that's the 1960s. That's 1,600 years. The council renounced the deicide charge that the Jews killed Jesus. Think about that. There were some people in the crowd that yelled, "Crucify him." But that the nation killed him. The council emphasized the common heritage of Jews and Christians and reaffirmed the Jewishness of Jesus and the apostles. I told you that story one time of a sister teaching adult ed in Washington when I was on sabbatical, and she said, I had the worst time, Barbara. And I said, why? She said, I finally got them to admit that Jesus was Jewish. Now, this is in the 90s. But this one guy goes out and he said, Sister, I'll accept Jesus was Jewish, but not Mary. So that anti-Semitism has deep roots within the Christian church. Nevertheless, apart from these expressions of family-like proximity to the Jewish people, the declaration from Vatican II did not investigate the theological implications of this perception of the church's past. It's no longer possible to see the suffering of the Jews and their exile as a punishment and evidence of Christianity's victory. Now, this is important because of what is going on, not just in our country, but in Europe as well. Come on now, give me some your reactions. Yes, sir.
Went to a Catholic grammar school and a Catholic high school in the 50s and 60s, and a Jesuit college. But growing up in grammar school, I can't tell you how many times I heard it, but it was the one true church thing. That, you know, this is the one place we're right and the rest of them are wrong or go to hell or whatever, right? And I think that belief that you're either with us or against us, or however you want to call it, just pervades everything. So if I'm right and you're wrong, there's no dialogue we can have here, unless I can convince you that you believe that we're right too, and then move over. And I think that philosophy, I think we have to be more aware that other people are leading good lives in other ways, either in other religions or without religion, and they believe that they're right. And they're trying to do, you know, to take care of their kids and to live in a country that's safe, all the same objectives. But I think the concept was so pervasive. I mean, I can remember kids thinking, I'm a Catholic school Catholic, can I marry a public school Catholic? I mean, you know, just ridiculous stuff that was, you know, so absurd when you think about it. And so I think it's the narrowness of, you know, our Catholic tradition, as well as other Christians, that we feel comfortable in doing damage to other people that don't practice what we practice.
And it not only appears in our religious life, but in our political life as well. People of goodwill have different opinions. Our birth is an accident. That I came in a Roman Catholic family was an accident of birth. That you came maybe,
That's what makes us who we are. You know?
That's what makes us who we are. Yes.
You added political. It's not just, you know, it's in different realms. It's also at work, you know. We often joke that I'm in hospital management, and half the professions in a hospital think that everything would be perfect if they ran it. You know, so everyone comes from their perspective.
That's right. Everyone comes from their perspective and feels, in a sense, that they could do better. Yes, Bob.
You've explored some really important religious bases for anti-Semitism, but you touched on another one, which I think is actually more powerful today, and it has to do with financial success and power. And I think for those who are in positions of financial success and power, when you look at how many Jews are in those positions, it's easy to point to them and say, they're the bad guys, we're the good ones, we want their power. In my experience, growing up in a neighborhood that was 80% Jewish, Education was highly valued, hard work was highly valued, all things that we think are good. And that turns into the result that Jews become very successful, just like anybody else who values education and hard work. But to paint them as the other, as many others groups, Muslims have been painted as the other, blacks have been painted as the other, Hispanic people have been painted as the other. It empowers those who are fundamentally feeling their own weakness and not willing to accept that they're part of a community.
I think that's a good point, the financial aspect, yeah. I taught at Benjamin Franklin High School for 6 years, BC, before the convent. And we had such a diverse population. We had maybe 10% African American. We had a large Jewish population. We had many immigrants, a large Polish, Slavic, and the Jewish students just learned this to value education. But I do think the financial piece is huge. I think sometimes we in our country and around the world suffer from what we call scarcity model. That if Bob does well over here, that means less for me. If Bob here does well financially, that means less for me. Whereas, or if we accept so many immigrants, then that means less for me. They forget the statement that Ronald Reagan made when he left office. Don't limit immigration because it makes our country diverse and powerful. It's a replace, yeah. And that's what the Christians lived with. We have replaced the Jews. You know, so it's something that I think is dangerous, and it's something that's really growing. And I think the scarcity model comes into play when some whites are very nervous that they think they will be overtaken. And so we have this white supremacy movement as well. Was it Charlottesville that all these men and women with candles and so forth marched through the city and said, "The Jews shall not replace us"? So all of this is to say the Christmas event is bigger than we thought. It's not only that we're made in God's image, but that God took on our image and calls us to really love one another, no matter who we are, not necessarily like, but love, which means we don't wish you ill. So Christmas is more than just the little one in the crib. It calls us to a whole different way of life. You want to add something, honey? Good. Albany Medical College.
That's my daughter, one of my daughters. So when you mentioned the baby, it clicked with a thought I had earlier. When you were speaking, I was thinking in my head, even if some history was true, even if it was, and not fabricated or adjusted for one group's thinking or not over time, how long should accountability last? And then I was thinking of the baby Jesus from the standpoint of birth, rebirth, thinking fresh. Every year is anew, you know. And so I put those two together thinking, you know, our accountability starts now in the present and not to hold people accountable for what they did before. And so that piece connected with me.
Anyone else? It is the conclusions I hope we make are these. And this next thing is my definition of original sin. Every time I watch a baptism, I remember in the day, get that baby before that baby dies and goes to limbo. Or, as sometimes the grammar school nuns would say, it's like a milk bottle here, and a sin is a black dot on that milk bottle. And so, yes, we are made in God's image, but we're limited. No one can tell me that little child that Rob will hold in his arms to be baptized is a sinner. That baby is a treasure made in God's image, and that baby needs a community to help him or her as they mature to face their limits and to take the Christian message and make it whole. That's why we baptize someone into a community of faith. Our limits are shown through our faults. You and I hurt others. I know at some level I have a racist streak. I don't know where it came from, but I know it's there. We have anti-Semitic feelings. We are now attacking Asians. And the baptism, the power of baptism, is that it gives us a faith community to guard against these human faults. We're part of a church, which first and foremost, I don't think is an institution. We're part of a community, the body of Christ. And so I think this season calls us to sometimes rethink things. That Christ became one of us, and that over the years we have punished Jewish people because of a historical event. So, does this give you any help or encouragement? What, honey? Encouragement and reason why we're called to love each other. And remember, it doesn't mean like. And that's when it's harder. That's when it's harder. So what I'd like to do is share finally 2 poems from Anne Weems and get your sense of them about this Advent season. She writes, "Some of us walk into Advent tethered to our unresolved yesterdays. The pain still stabbing, the hurt still throbbing. It's not that we don't know better. It's just that we can't stand up anymore by ourselves. On the way to Bethlehem, will you give us a hand?" Here's another. "The whole world waits in December darkness for a glimpse of the light of God. Even those who snarl humbug and chase away the carolers have been looking toward the skies. The one who declared he never would forgive has forgiven. The one who left home, those who left home have returned, and even wars are halted, if briefly, as the world looks starward. In the December darkness, we peer from our windows, watching for an angel with the rainbow wings to announce the world of hope." And finally, Advent, angel-filled Advent. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Advent came filled with angels and alleluias? Wouldn't it be perfect if we were greeted on these December mornings with hovering of heavenly hosts, turning their harps and brushing up their fa-la-las? Wouldn't it be incredible if their music filled our walking hours with promise of peace on earth? And if each Advent night we dreamed of nothing but goodwill, wouldn't we be ecstatic? If we would take the angels shopping or trim the tree or have them hold our hand and dance through our houses decorating. And oh, how glorious it would be to sit in church next to an angel and sing, "Hark the Heralds." What an Advent that would be. What Christmas spirit we could have. An angel-filled Advent with so many possibilities. But in lieu of that, perhaps we can give thanks for the good earthly joys we have been given, and for the earthly angels that we know, who do such a good job of filling our Advent with alleluias. And you know, that's what you are. Advent angels who come together and appreciate this season of new light, being fully aware that there are issues in our country and the world that need addressing. So, any comment? You're awfully good to come. I appreciate it. Rob? I'm a little early.
And I'm honored. Advent angels. This weekend, Advent angels. And, you know, this weekend, hopefully I'll be able to share a little bit of joy. We've got Joseph, who, oh my God, he went through a lot. And he responded. So Advent angels, listening to annunciations and proclamations. As Barbara was sharing about our Jewish sisters and brothers, Hanukkah begins tomorrow, and I sent my Hanukkah cards out to my friends yesterday. It still amazes me. This is the beginning of time. Why are the Jewish people persecuted? And once in a while, here, even in circles, people make references, derogatory. I think it's humor against my sisters and brothers. I'm like, really? I want to call you on that. I have a very good friend, very dear friend now, who is suffering health issues. Her name is Marla, and when I met her 40-some years ago, she did not tolerate any jokes. Now, her husband was Polish, so you remember the days of Polish jokes and all that kind of stuff. But Marla would cut you right in your kneecaps. And then everybody that knew her, you would never, ever say anything derogatory or negative. And I gave her credit for doing that. I can remember that, as I told you, 40-some years ago. We should be the same way. No jokes, no negativity. about our sisters and brothers. Jesus was Jewish. He came into the world.
And Mary.
And Mary. What about Joseph?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
In fact,
all right.
all the apostles.
Right.
The first pope, please.
All right. And I just said something, it's funny you're saying about the first pope. Someone was talking to me this week goes, oh my God, wasn't he married?
Yeah.
Obviously he
Mother-in-law.
was. So they're going like, what the hell? Oh, excuse me. They're like, what? You're not, people can't get married today? Like, okay, anyways, that's another subject.
Another subject for lunch.
I hope everyone, and I appreciate Barb's wisdom again, and all of you being here and watching us. The sensitivity to love and respect every person. I know it's hard and difficult. Things happen in our lives, in our families, our community circles, but still, we are called and challenged. Well, I'm going to say, like Joseph, who I'll be preaching about this weekend. Can you imagine what was on his plate? Who knows what brought him and Mary together? But it'd be a passion, love. We're told they're betrothed. We never hear words from Joseph, but we hear words by his response. And he made himself aware of what God was speaking to him. And he said, okay, right? We all know the story. And he went forth in respect. And can you imagine the ridicule? In his day, when the word got out, she was already pregnant. We know among our days, hearing about different pregnancies and what have you. But in that day, she would have been stoned to death. But he listened to God and responded and went forth. We hear the word righteous. May we pray in these final days of our Advent journey, illuminated by his light, we'll do our best to be righteous among one another. And again, I'll say, damn, isn't it great to have her here? So thank you, Barb.
Oh, gosh. Well, thank you. He enables me to use a gift that others won't. God bless him. We need more like him. So, the importance of the incarnation, the evilness of anti-Semitism, and get a different view of original sin. We're not perfect. That's what it means, I think. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful holiday, safe home, and I appreciate your kindness in coming. Take care.